Hello and welcome to the Good Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our TGT interview series where I have a chat to a journalist or ex-pro or writer about a current topic. And well, this is the right time to be talking about certain things, very specific things, of course. And I'm joined by a fantastic guest today, Mr. James Benge from Football London. How are you doing, James?
I'm very well, thanks. Very well.
Good stuff. So I thought I'd actually start off with a slightly different tact with today's show and discuss how the lockdown has impacted the journalism sector, of course, very heavily involved yourself. How have you had to deal with the situation of lockdown as a journalist and anyone else around in sort of the Football London sphere? How has it impacted you guys over there?
I mean, I think it would be very fair to say it's been a challenge, and particularly a challenge, I think, for someone like us. I mean, obviously, a lot of the journalists that your viewers might engage with them, there'll be the journalists at national newspapers, and although this has been there'll be at bigger websites, and although this has been a sort of a tough time for print media, it's often a tough time for print media. There is a lot of stuff to talk about and to cover from a journalistic perspective. Obviously, I work for Football.London. The clue is in the title, and there has been very little football of late. So I think that has been both a challenge, and there's no point pretending it hasn't been, and also something that just liberates you to do things you wouldn't have time to do otherwise, to, think. I mean, that's a huge thing. Like, the 2-3 games a week cycle, when you get into that, it doesn't offer you a lot of time to sit down and really examine how a player is doing. And both myself and colleagues have had time to write about players from numerous different angles, and also to get in touch with people, to pester people that know people, and set up interviews. I've been really lucky to have been able to speak to Arsenal players past and present. Obviously, had a big interview with Hector Bellerin that came out this week. It was fantastic. Obviously, one of the most erudite footballers out there. Also, former Arsenal players, some of whom you'll have heard of. So Steffi Mavididi, he's a really smart guy, really going places. Also got one next week with one that I think even the most expert Arsenal fans might have forgot, Craig Holloway. You may not remember him. Goalkeeper, never played a game, but was on the bench when Arsenal lost at the Mestalla. And I think that's the joy, is, you can just be a bit more creative, a bit more left field. Having said that, really desperate for the football to come back as well.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, I don't know if you managed to catch much of the German Bundesliga when it restarted a couple of weeks ago. So strange watching it in the scenario where obviously they're celebrating to stands where there's no one there, and socially distanced celebrations. And that sort of brings us on to looking at how the Premier League might restart things. Do you think this is the right climate, starting middle of June, sort of end of where we're looking at where they might restart it now? Do you think they're going about it in the right way? And do you think this is the right time to start the Premier League?
Well, there isn't a perfect time, and there isn't a perfect way to go about this. There's no master plan to base this off. We haven't had a stoppage of football like this since the Second World War, and the context is different. What has to happen for things to get back underway, and we have no idea really, particularly people outside of the medical profession and outside of government, and let's be frank, some people in government have no idea what the future might hold in relation to coronavirus. We just know that for quite a long time we're going to be living with this. Whenever that vaccine is ready, life might get back to something more like what it was. But even as the cases trickle down, we still have to have social distancing measures in place, and there will still have to be football in some form, because right now we're at a stage where League One and League Two clubs have an awful lot of financial question marks hanging over them. The same with the Championship. Now, if you wait until a vaccine emerges, that's going to engulf a lot of the Premier League. I mean, we'll talk, I'm sure, a bit about Arsenal's finances specifically, but they can't go forever without any football, without anything to sell broadcasters. And right now, Premier League clubs have got to think, where can we realistically find an income stream? And that is television broadcast. and I suspect they'll make, that Sky will make an awful lot of money and BT will make an awful lot of money from the first few weekends of the Premier League, more than they would have otherwise. Such is the desperation to have it back on TV. There are risks, are huge risks, and I totally understand. When someone like Troy Deeney or N'Golo Conte says, "I can't come back to training," I think we have to understand that. We have to accept that. It shouldn't really be a topic for debate, and actually, I don't think there has been a huge amount. But you've got to play. You can't just wait for the vaccine for football to happen again. I mean, that you could be waiting years, and it's not something that's in your hands.
Yeah, it's a very strange. Speaking from sort of my perspective as a teacher, which is obviously a different profession, but an area in which I'm looking at like it's going to be going back in June in a very, very limited capacity with only certain year groups. And when you see footballers saying that they're refusing to go into training, part of me thinks like, well, I haven't got a choice in this. I'm going back. But then there's obviously the more moral side of things where you look at it, well, if Troy Deeney's son is very vulnerable and it were Deeney to bring back that into his home, then yes, of course, you would think it's the right thing completely to do to avoid that training. But if something happens, or I don't know how much information or how much aware of this you are, but say I've seen some clubs say that if someone is tested positive, it will be effectively treated like an injury. They will self-isolate for 14 days and then come back. But a lot of people would argue that's not the correct way to look at it, because if one person's infected, then surely that means whilst he's been surrounded by other players in the team, there's a high chance that they could also be infected. And if that then goes into a game, that could spread that infection further. So how do you think if a test comes back positive, that could affect the team going into a match day?
Well, we don't know yet. That's the honest answer. Look at what happened in the Bundesliga with, I think it was Dynamo Dresden. It may have been another team. But, the games just had to be postponed. And look, that might be what happens. There is going to be significant amounts of testing. Arsenal, I should say Arsenal, as far as I'm aware, they've bought all their tests privately. This is not kind of being taken out of the public stock. It's not stuff that would be going to the NHS otherwise. I think that's super important. We're clear on that. The honest answer is that I don't think the club's quite sure yet. It will depend when that test comes back positive. I mean, also, if you look at the numbers, it would appear that in the Premier League, they don't seem to have tested as many people as Dortmund. But the numbers that came back yesterday was the day before, it was six positive tests out of about 800, 3 of which were at one club. And I think we'll know more when we see what happens with Watford, because they will be testing their players, I'm sure, all the more regularly right now, and being super across, that specific issue. And we just have to learn. It's going to be the same for yourself at school, I'm sure. And it's an incredibly scary time. I think almost more scary than going into lockdown is we're going to have to come back out into lockdown, out into the world. We're going to have to do our jobs because we can't wait forever. Even footballers, they will not be able to. They will not be able to wait forever. You've got to try it. I think we could end up with the season having a aim for the date it finishes, and it runs a little bit beyond that, or significantly beyond that. And I think you're best off finishing this season, because you have no idea what's going to happen with the 2020-21 season, and whether we're going to have a second spike over the winter. That seems to be what scientists expect, but that's so far away. You've just got to deal with the situation at the moment. Try and be live to specific instances, whilst obviously building a longer term policy, which the Premier League will continue to work on, I'm sure. If we then focus more into Arsenal's specific side of things, I mean, the whole transfer side of things, and has caused a lot of questions, because whilst week upon week I'm putting out these videos breaking down players that Arsenal are linked to, and it doesn't matter what time of the year, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or if we're in the middle of the season, Arsenal are still getting linked with players. I'm actually quite interested about some of the players that are still at the club first, before we go into who might be coming in. And Cameron Brooks in the chat box actually brings up something I wanted to focus on. Cedric and Pablo Marie, who of course joined the club on loan in January. How in the know are you about, are these two players looked upon as possible signings this coming summer window, or has this situation changed Arsenal's plans with those types of players? So I'll talk about Marie first. When he was signed on loan, it was a loan with every intention of activating the buy out clause, which I think is around £8 million. So it's a very good deal. Like, for a centre back, if you think they're good enough to start for Arsenal, obviously we don't have a huge evidence base on Marie yet. Arsenal have till the end of June, so at most maybe one or two more games on top of that. But they believed he was a good player. Part of it was, they didn't have the money right now, but £10 million, from what I've heard, that's a deal that's more likely to happen. I don't think there've been any conversations with Flamengo. Cedric is a really interesting one, and I haven't really got a good answer on this because there's a huge number of wheels to it. I don't know of a similar case, certainly in the Premier League, even maybe in Europe, which is he's out of contract with Southampton on June the 30th. And that's also when his loan at Arsenal officially expires. Now, perhaps Arsenal intend to agree a new contract with him, and that could just go live on July the 1st. And I'm sure the powers that be at the FA and the Premier League would allow that because he's registered in the squad. But equally, I don't particularly see what the benefit for Southampton would be in extending his contract briefly. It's a really weird one, and obviously he's someone that we've not seen play a single game. I think a lot of Arsenal supporters and people at Arsenal would be pretty confident that he could go and do a job as a backup right back to Bellerin. Obviously, that's been a really difficult position for Arsenal, but you could well find yourself making that decision with absolutely no evidence of how he fits in at Arsenal beyond small-sided training sessions, the odd group session, and maybe one or two appearances. It's a really tough one. I don't know. The final bit of that, I guess, was Torreira. I'll say this a lot, but who out there in Italy has the money to pay Arsenal for Lucas Torreira?
Yeah.
Is there a swap deal you can do? I know there's lots of talk about swap deals, and they are going to be more common. I've spoken to several agents. They all kind of think there'll be a few more swap deals and clubs will be a bit more reasonable about negotiating them. But you kind of then have to find a situation where you have Torreira and the club that you're selling him to. And then that club that you're selling him to has a player that you want at Arsenal. So, let's take AC Milan because they're continually linked with him. I don't really see many players in that Milan squad that Mikel Arteta is going to be saying, get me him. And the ones that you might think, well, yeah, we'll take him. Do AC Milan value that player at the same level as Torreira? Is he a player they want to throw in on the deal? You might say, oh, yeah, AC Milan, you can have Lucas Torreira, but we want Donnarumma for the same price. And then it becomes, well, I'm not sure that's a great deal for AC Milan. And then, I could make dozens of examples of that for every club across Europe. There's clearly something with Torreira and a return to Italy, but also, he has been a lot happier with Arteta. That everything I've heard, he was deeply unhappy with Emery, so it's quite a low bar to clear. But I don't see that happening, and I'll say this with a few transfers. I think the likelihood is this Arsenal squad will look much more. There will be a much less radical overhaul because don't forget as well, there is an acceptance at Arsenal that they let too much leadership go out the door. For everything that some of the nonsense that Unai Emery said that's been absolutely laughed out of Highbury, they would agree with him that losing Monreal, Ramsey, Koscielny, Cech was not good. Obviously, they didn't want to lose all of them, but was not a good approach to the window.
So many leaders in one group. I say Arsenal and leaders. The word leadership in Arsenal often scoffed at a few times, but it would be unfair to say that those guys were not big figures in the dressing room and losing all those guys. I kind of want to circle back to what you mentioned about Bellerin, considering you had that fantastic chance to do the interview with him. That the rhetoric of it was that he wants to become someone who Arteta was for him in what he wrote. And I'm interested about that because on the same day I saw that you published that piece, I saw some transfer links with Bellerin being linked away from the club, and that this summer that might be he's ready now to move on from Arsenal. So what, from the feeling you got from speaking to him, what situation can you tell people about Bellerin and where his head's at?
I mean, this is also from talking to people that know Bellerin very well as well. he takes great pride in being a cornerstone at Arsenal. That's not a guarantee that he will stay forever. He has obviously struggled with injuries of late. Even just before the lockdown, he was carrying a thigh injury, playing through it quite often. About 4 separate games he played through with a thigh injury. You kind of think that might be why he struggled to show himself at his best. So if he rediscovers that form, he will be acutely aware that he could be one of the best right backs in the world. And if Arsenal aren't at the level to achieve what he wants, he may well move on in years to come. But he has worked incredibly hard to establish himself at Arsenal. He's incredibly grateful to the club for the support they gave him, for the chance to establish himself. And we all know he loves life in London. For someone like Bellerin with so many interests off the pitch, London is a great place to be. And he's just been made vice captain. May well be captain if Aubameyang were to go. I mean, he would be the first choice, I'm sure, of a lot of supporters. So you add all that together, I don't get the sense that he's lost interest in being an Arsenal player. He may not be forever, but he's really proud, and he's turned down opportunities, so many. We know about the links with Barcelona. I mean, I've reported before as well. Unai Emery, when he was PSG manager, was desperate to sign Bellerin, and there were people close to Bellerin saying, "Go to Paris." Nothing else. Possibly the only
over there.
Great for fashion. Yeah. Chance to play in the Champions League, win league titles, get in the Spain squad, and he turned that down. I mean, I don't really see why he'd go to Atletico Madrid, even Bayern Munich.
Yeah, Bayern was the club that I saw with the link. That was an odd one. You think about Joshua Kimmich there.
Atletico have the Salco and Kieran Trippier.
Yeah.
I don't really understand what the third right back is. I know Diego Simeone likes a defensive lineup or two, but he'd struggle to field 3 right backs.
I think they might even have is it Arias as well, the Colombian they've got there as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, so unbelievable.
Trying to put together a whole team of right backs.
Yes.
What that could achieve.
Can play further forward, in fairness to that. But I mean, you mentioned Aubameyang there. It's a big name that comes up in a lot of Arsenal fans' mind. Previously, we had a chat on here with Graham Hunter, and he mentioned how in January that Barcelona and Aubameyang, there was a contact between the two parties in January, whether it was Aubameyang's representative sort of sounding out Barcelona, seeing what the situation was. But from that interview and the point when we done it, which was around March time, he told us that effectively Barcelona have sort of moved on to other targets, which is interesting. So, because I now can't picture where Aubameyang would now go. So that's where my head's at. So do you, in your opinion, can you see Aubameyang remaining and possibly even signing a new deal at Arsenal?
So there's 2 bits of there, which is the remaining and the signing the new deal.
Yes.
I mean, I'd heard similar about Barcelona in January. I mean, I'd heard rumours that they taught that the word got to Arsenal about a loan bid. That they were intending to borrow Aubameyang, which didn't go down well. I don't think Barcelona would ever actually have made that offer because they'd have known what they'd have got back. Yeah. So there was a set of circumstances that kind of made sense, which was Lautaro Martinez from Inter Milan goes to Barcelona. That seems to have genuine legs in it. I'm no expert on either club, but it's been quite widely reported in the Spanish and Italian press. And from there, Inter go in for Aubameyang as the replacement. We know Conte really likes Aubameyang. Again, with all these things, it's a fiddly thing of how the huge changes away from football have impacted on finances in football, and how does that deal get done between Barcelona and Inter Milan? How does Barcelona find the money to pay Inter for Martinez? That bit seems very difficult.
Yeah,
I've long thought, and this is just my opinion, that the most likely circumstances are that Aubameyang stays and sees out his contract and sees what the market is saying in January of next year. Because if you're Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and you're 31, there might be some clubs that are a bit hesitant about paying a big money fee for you now, like maybe PSG, kind of when money's no object, or Man City. They can think about paying that. Who knows? Maybe Newcastle. But there aren't a huge number of clubs that are run, that are run without outside investment, that would look at a 31-year-old on big wages with no resale value and think, this is a deal we have to do. You look at the profile of players Real Madrid sign at the moment. You're talking players that are early 20s at the oldest. You can make an argument for moving for Aubameyang, but it's on a transfer fee, it's really tough to make work. Whereas if you're Aubameyang and you wait till January of 2021 and you could sign as a free agent, the world is your oyster. Look at Aaron Ramsey. Let's be frank. Juventus signed Aaron Ramsey because all they had to do was pay him wages, and nowhere near the wages that were initially reported. He's not the top earner. He might be second to Ronaldo, but it's not 400,000 a week. And Ozil did that. And the offers never quite materialised for Ozil, so he stayed at Arsenal. And if you're Aubameyang, a lot of clubs can talk themselves into giving you a really tempting 2-year deal, maybe 3-year deal, if they're not paying you wages. If your dream is, his is to play for Real Madrid, your chances are dramatically improved if you're about to be a free agent. So you almost think that the circumstances where it's most likely he goes in the next transfer window is if Arsenal actively look to sell him and just think we need to get any return we can on Aubameyang. But I still think that he'll get to January of next year, and we will see from there. We'll see what teams are interested, and also what Arsenal want to do. Because I don't think they don't want to offer him a huge pay rise. They don't want another Ozil situation. So I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't see a transfer happening this summer.
It's so odd because when you think back to Raul's comments about trying to refrain from letting players go into that final year, but obviously with the situation we're in now, that may change things, and things are so fluid at the moment in how things are passing through the club. Our other striker is also being linked with possible moves away, which is going to segue nicely into a mini Atletico Madrid chat in just a second. But Tashi in the chat asked about the recent links with swapping him with Thomas Lemar. And we did a chat with John Driscoll, who does the La Liga Weekly podcast, and he talked about how signing Lemar was almost comical in a way, because the way that he's transitioned to playing for Atletico, which obviously are a very industrial side, just hasn't worked at all. And obviously Arsenal previously put in supposedly a near £100 million bid back in the day for Thomas Lemar. So things have changed a lot since then. What do you think about this possible deal? And obviously in isolation, the idea of Lacazette moving on.
I wouldn't do it. My personal opinion, until I know what Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang is doing, I'm not dreaming of parting with Lacazette. Swapping him for Lemar makes so little sense for me if I'm Raul Sanllehi and I look at my squad and I have arguably the two best young left wingers in Europe. I've got to work out how Saka and Martinelli fit into this team and how I can develop them. I'm absolutely not signing Thomas Lemar. I don't need to. And, Arsenal really don't want to make the sort of Gnabry-ish mistakes again of having Oxlade-Chamberlain and Walcott in a squad, eating up all Gnabry's minutes, and they lose him for next to nothing. I mean, obviously the other swap deal that continually gets mentioned is Thomas Partey for Lacazette. It's more tempting because Arsenal have a weakness in central midfield, and they want a player like Partey. Not necessarily Partey, but again, you're strengthening your midfield to weaken your attack. If you don't know that Aubameyang is staying, what have you really achieved? You've kind of left yourself with a much more expensive hole in the squad to fill, which is trying to get that sort of marquee forward. Also, I know the fan base has really gone off Lacazette this season. I would remind them it was last season he was the player of the year. Even if you think Aubameyang should have won it, it was a close fight between the two, and he was the one scoring goals mattered the most. He was the one scoring the winner in the San Paolo, scoring against Chelsea, all those goals. And he has been carrying an injury this whole season. So I really don't see a great logic to moving him on. Again, you've got the issue of contracts, and the fact he's got 2 years left is looming large. But the worst scenario for Arsenal is that they start 2020-21 with either neither striker or with one of them, but they could well go. Like, why on earth would you lose Lacazette? It doesn't really make much sense to me at all.
No, and I agree with you, and I get quite shocked in a way that I see a lot of people on social media who berate Lacazette week on week, and I get it in a way because obviously he misses a lot of chances this season, but he has been, as you say, injured for quite a lot of it, and that has affected things, and confidence is so key, especially for any Arsenal player it seems, in the last decade or so. So losing that and losing maybe the backing of the fans has had a knock-on and exponential impact on the player's form, but the people forget, as you mentioned, that he was the player of the year last season, and that's so quickly forgotten. And for me, I think that this is a guy that if he's playing with enough support and the right service, he can be lethal, because that's what he was for Lyon. But it's interesting how things change so rapidly and opinions change on players so rapidly. Last couple of things before we wrap up. The most interesting player for me at the moment is Henrik Mkhitaryan, because obviously he went to Roma on loan. He's extremely vocal at the moment about how much he wants to remain in Italy. And then I have to mention it because otherwise my friend will kill me, but Mike McDonald wrote a really, really good piece for Gunners Town on a possible swap deal with Justin Kluivert, which has been now mentioned, with a possible fee in addition to Mkhitaryan. But on Mkhitaryan, is this a possibility for Arsenal to gain a little bit? In my eyes, this is the best way Arsenal can gain a little buffer in the possible transfer market next season. How do you look at this deal?
I mean, I think whatever you do, you need to try and get those wages off the book. That's £10 million you save. You can't put that all in the transfer kitty, but that's good money. Obviously, I've seen. I'm not really sure how much those links with Clive are real and how much is. I think it's kind of was just something floated by the Italian press as like this could work. But I think that's a really interesting deal to make from Arsenal's perspective in terms of getting some money off your wage bill, but also just kind of buying young on an interesting talent. There's very little downside, I think, for me personally, to going and getting someone like Kluivert, who was so good in that final season at Ajax. Like, it obviously hasn't worked out for him at Roma, but he's 21, I think, or 22. Quite versatile forward, can play across the front line. Suspect could play, kind of off a central striker, or if needs be, as a central striker. I mean, he could always ask his dad if he has to get some tips on playing through the middle. And if it didn't work out with Kluivert, he'll still be young enough that you'll get a solid return for him. I mean, even if it meant kind of throwing 10 to 15 million pounds or euros into the mix, I would seriously consider swapping Kluivert for Mkhitaryan. If Mkhitaryan comes back, he's going to see out 1 year of his contract, and best case scenario, he's quite good, and you have to give him another contract, and then he'll be bad at the end of that contract.
Yeah.
Whereas Kluivert, best case scenario, he's a top quality forward, who could give you another great option for that front line playing anywhere. Could be your Mesut Ozil replacement, could be a rival for Pepe and Nelson. I'd do that straight away. But I mean, if they can work out a deal that gets Mkhitaryan's wages off the books, that's a great bit of business by Sanyei.
100%. Last thing then, I want to give a shout to someone in the chat. I will find the question as we're talking about it, but there was a mention of the situation with Bukayo Saka. Lots of talk throughout the season as he had his breakthrough about trying to time down to a bigger deal. Are you in the know about any of this, about what the situation with the contract is? Has there been any progress whilst we've been in lockdown? How is that situation?
No progress. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't really been any great moves. I don't know if talks have begun. I reported last month that nothing had happened since February. I've asked a few people who kind of are tangentially related to this, and I think the sense is that there's still not been much progress even since. So it is not. Arsenal are still pretty optimistic that they'll get him to sign a new contract, and rightly so, because they've shown every young player that they will commit to giving them minutes. So there's still an awful lot of optimism there, and I know that Saka does feel a sort of great bond with Arsenal. He's been there since he was 8 or 10. It'll be a convincing offer to get him to leave, but those clubs are lining up to sign him. I know that Dortmund view him as the guy they would look to if Sancho left. He's certainly on their list as a potential Sancho replacement. Liverpool said to be really keen on him as well. Every sort of top club in Europe is looking at Saka's situation and going, he's out of contract in 2021. Arsenal's financial situation is really worrying. We could pick ourselves up a huge bargain here. Equally, Arsenal do not want to lose him. There's not really a fee beyond the sort of exorbitant levels that would convince them to sell up, because they know how badly it would go down with the fan base, with Mikel Arteta, with everyone. It would be a bizarre idea. How much would it take you to sell a player who could well be the cornerstone of your side for a decade that you paid nothing for? You'd have to pay a lot of money to replace Saka. So Arsenal want to keep him. They hope that they can keep him, but they've not really progressed in terms of keeping him. They haven't really managed to get Saka and his representatives sat down across a digital table, I guess, to talk about terms. It's a pressing matter, though, and one they're going to look to address. But now, as far as I know, they haven't yet. In spite of the excitement that certain Instagram posts
as the source of all true news around the world is Instagram. Very much in Bukayo Saka's court. Thank you ever so much, James, for taking the time out of your afternoon to come on the show and give us your thoughts on plenty of topics.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to talk and answer questions.
Brilliant stuff. You can find James on Twitter at James Benge, and of course check out their stuff over at football.london. That's it. That's us done for today. Thank you ever so much for watching. Please make sure you drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.